Hey everyone, welcome to the Hormone Genius Podcast. Today, Teresa and I get the pleasure of interviewing Bekah Knobeloch. So Bekah, welcome to our show.
Hi ladies, thank you for having me.
Hey there. So I'm just going to introduce you here quick and then we're going to want to hear more from you. But Bekah is a Lincoln native. She's a mama of 4 and wife to a mountain man from Colorado. She is a registered nurse with a national certification in pediatrics. Currently, you can find her practicing nursing as a Marquette model natural family planning instructor at FeminineGeniusMinistries.com. I love that name. I love it. When she isn't homeschooling or teaching NFP, she loves to travel, write, and host dinner parties. I want to know more about you, Bekah, because that little ditty makes me interested in getting to know you more. So why don't we start there? Share with us a little bit more about you and how you got started in this line of work.
Thanks, Jamie. Yeah, so I am from Nebraska originally. I went to high school here in Lincoln, and then I went on to the University of Nebraska Medical Center here at the Lincoln campus as well. I graduated with my bachelor's in nursing, and 1 week after I graduated, I moved to Arkansas because that's where my husband was stationed. He was a pilot in the Air Force at the time. So I lived in Arkansas and was a peds nurse at the Arkansas Children's Hospital. And I actually did some school nursing in Arkansas as well. And then when he was done in the military, we moved to Austin, Texas for 2 years. And I did pediatric home health and a little bit of hospice down in Texas. And then we got an opportunity, almost 6 years ago. I tell people we just moved back, but really we moved back quite a few years ago to Lincoln. And when we moved back here, I wasn't sure what I was going to do as far as nursing goes, because the Children's Hospital is about an hour away. And I didn't know. I wasn't sure where I wanted to go. I stayed home with the kids for about a year. We got pregnant with our third. And it was actually a priest friend of ours who was over for dinner. I was 7 months pregnant. And he said, why don't you become an NFP teacher or something? Because I was kind of talking about the Marquette method. And I was like, who tells a 7-month pregnant woman she should go to school and learn something new? But I looked into it. I realized that maybe that was the method I wanted to do postpartum, which I know we're going to talk about today. And I was like, oh, there's no instructors here. So it just really fell kind of in my lap, and it worked out well that I was sort of learning alongside my initial clients, who thank goodness were mostly my friends, in the beginning when I had this new baby and we were kind of going on that journey together. So that's how I got in with NFP, and teaching. And then it's grown from there. Megan McDermott became the first other instructor in Feminine Genius Ministries with me. She had learned Marquette from me and then had a desire to teach it as well. And then we grew. Evie was living in Hastings at the time. Now she lives in Lincoln. We have Jess, who's in Falls City, and then Marisha, actually, who knows Teresa, who's in Omaha. So we've grown and over these last few years, and it's been really, really great.
It's really amazing. And I love that we have now a Marquette presence, because there wasn't one for a while. So this is so important. And yes, I was so excited when my nurse that I work with, Marisha, was able to become an instructor as well. So thank you, all of you who are NFP teachers, number one, because it's a ministry. It's a service that you're providing to women. So thank you for doing that. I would love to hear kind of with the feminine genius part of it, what drew you to that name even, and kind of what was your idea of, because obviously to you, it's more than just teaching. How are you feeling about your mission in terms of serving women?
Yeah. So my mother is a certified nurse midwife in town, and she was a labor and delivery nurse before that. So I've been around women's health stuff my whole life. And I was drawn to NFP. Yes, couples are so important in marriages, and that's definitely a piece of it, but my heart is there with women as well. And I kind of picked the name Feminine Genius Ministries before I really understood what the term meant. And then someone asked me to come speak at UNL at the Newman Center about the feminine genius. And they were like, well, you understand it, right? Because you named your business that. And I was like, oh, I should probably look into this. I just knew John Paul II and Edith Stein used it, and I really liked them. And I was like, this seems like it fits. And but it's grown. So the seed was planted. I'm so glad I said yes, because it's perfect. Because I really do believe that, the masculine genius is just as critically important, but we really have done women a disservice over the last almost century with how we've suppressed women's hormones. So I think we really need to just reclaim that. And hopefully in the process, we just elevate the dignity of sexuality and humanity in general, but it was really the female side of it. And to encourage women as they understand their bodies, then they also grow an awareness of their spiritual health, their mental health, their emotional health. It's all so intertwined. But this is such a key component, our biology, the way our bodies work. And it sets that foundation. It lets us exercise that muscle of awareness so we can pay attention to ourselves, our bodies, and what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Totally. I love that that's what NFP gets to do, or fertility awareness. So when we say fertility awareness methods or fertility appreciation methods or natural family planning NFP, they're all kind of one in the same camp. There's variants, but that's a whole other podcast episode. But I love how fertility awareness or NFP brings together that feminine genius reality of our nature and our biology. So like you were saying, like that spiritual nature of women, but then our biological nature and how the two intertwine with one another. I love that idea of when we're, as women, we're receptive, like not only biologically, like where the egg receives the sperm and our vagina receives the penis. I don't think we've said penis yet on our have we said that yet, Teresa?
I don't think so, Jamie, but
well, I am glad I'm here for this inaugural.
Right.
Yeah, we said it. The penis. We said it. So anyway,
yes.
We had to. It had to happen, and it's happening today.
Eventually.
Yes.
So we're receptive biologically, but then even we're receptive, like we're the ones as mothers to give our child a hug when they're sad, or to receive a friend with a listening ear. And so there's more to that, but I love, again, that you called your work the Feminine Genius Ministries, because I think that the name itself, it gives you that platform to explain that, to the women that you're working with, and to show that. So anyway, cool, Bekah. So tell us a little bit about your journey with charting, or kind of what, again, we heard you share about how the priest was like, you should teach this method. But what was your personal experience with charting your fertility?
So I was the person in their marriage prep class because for the Lincoln Diocese, we had to take an NFP intro session for marriage prep. So it is required here to get married in a church. And I wanted to be married at my home church, but I was actually on birth control at the time, and my husband was not Catholic. And I had no real intention of practicing NFP. So I sat in the class to check the box, no intention of practicing it, which is interesting because actually a few years prior, when I was 16, I was diagnosed with PCOS. And we did attempt some like post-peak progesterone, some luteal phase progesterone, but this was, I'm going to age myself, but this was like almost 20 years ago. And so Teresa knows like what we had available then and what we really maybe understood about teens or even PCOS was very different. And so I didn't tolerate it very well. And that was really hard for me, but I think it was just, that was 20 years ago. We've learned so much more. We have different ways of administering progesterone. And like I said, so I kind of went down that natural path a little bit. Mm-hmm. Then I got into college, made different choices. So I'm getting married on birth control and no intention of practicing NFP. Obviously, I'm here today, so something changed to that plan a little bit. My husband deployed to Afghanistan, and so I went off of the pill while he was gone. And I felt great. I didn't really realize how bad I felt until he was coming home, and I tried to go back on it, and I had panic attacks. Within 2 days of starting it, I started having panic attacks, and I realized like, oh, I do have some underlying anxiety, but it's definitely exacerbated by that severely. And I got rid of it, and I was like, okay, I have to figure something else out because I'm not doing this. And that was the first time it clicked for me. Like, oh, maybe the church wasn't like wrong. And then it just grew from there. And I've spoken with more and more friends who realized whether it's headaches or migraines or anxiety and depression, weight gain, decreased libido, all kinds of things that they're like, oh, I never put it together. So I was that person. Then I was the person who like learned their method, but didn't really follow up with their instructor and was like, I'm not sure this like really works because I'm not really charting or doing what I'm supposed to do. So I was like the epitome of the worst like client and worst person sitting in an NFP intro session, but the seeds were there. The seeds were there. I knew who I could still contact and reach out to when I was ready. And then I was nervous because we had actually conceived our third. We were going to end up with 3 kids, like 3 and under. We miscarried our third child right a week before we moved back here from Austin. So then when I got pregnant again and we had our third Jude, I was just overwhelmed. And I was like, I don't know. I'm scared to really do NFP. And a few of my friends said, you know, we've had really good success with Marquette. And I was like, okay, maybe I'll look into this. Maybe this will click better for me. And that's kind of where I started initially digging in, was just because a few of my friends were like, we found this and it worked well for us for this season of life. And I think that's the key, is just finding what works for you when, which, like Teresa said, I'm so glad we've been able to grow here in the Nebraska area, because everybody's different and has.
Yeah. So I'm in a postpartum group on social media. I don't know how I got in it, but I often just kind of watch, you know, what people post. And I think, you know, what they do postpartum, and I don't know, I guess the anxiety women feel postpartum about the return of their fertility and knowing when it's going to return and how to navigate that, it's very evident that is a big issue. Mm-hmm. And, you know, when I told Jamie about Bekah, I was like, I want Bekah to address this because she's a Marquette teacher. Mm-hmm. The reason why I think people are drawn to Marquette, and I often talk to my patients about what's best for them, is that there's an extra data point outside of just your own biological markers that allows a woman to, I don't know, have a little bit more confidence. It's kind of like a double check, you could say. For men, I think they like that kind of data point too. So first of all, Bekah, tell us a little bit about Marquette, you know, for our listeners that don't understand what we're saying. It's a university to them. They're like, why do they keep saying that university? Right. And then also we'll move into kind of the postpartum period and why this is so important.
Yeah. Marquette was, or is, because it's still, the research facility is there at Marquette University. So they are linked together. It's through their Institute of Natural Family Planning, which is through their College of Nursing. I meant to look it up before we talk. It's either 1999 or 2001. They're about in the 20-year mark. It may be that they opened in 99 and they really went public in 2001, but it's right in that time range. And they sought to they had a few different goals, but a lot of research was one goal. So we continue to they're testing new monitors, new testing strips that are out. They just want to figure out what's effective and what helps people use NFP well. They want, one of their goals is to help NFP be more broadly accepted in the greater medical community. Because I know you guys talked about this in the past too, but like it can be tough. I've lived in Austin and in Little Rock, and I'm blessed to be in Lincoln, Nebraska, where we're kind of in a bubble, where we have St. Paul VI, just 60 miles away. My mom's a nurse midwife. She's super crunchy. So people accept the natural stuff more so here. And so how Marquette addressed that. So like Creighton has the NAPRO component, which is how it's acknowledging that truth that menstrual cycles are a vital sign. They're part of healthcare. So you bring in that healthcare component. With Marquette, what they opted to do is everyone who teaches it is a licensed healthcare professional with a minimum of a bachelor's of science. So that was their take on this reality that our menstrual cycles are part of our healthcare. So just two different approaches to the same fact that we need to have a healthcare piece to this. And then this method that brought in this extra data point. So Marquette users can, and we teach them how to track mucus. They can track temperature if they want to. I'd say maybe have 10% who really like that and want to track their temperature. And then they also can track, they don't have to actually with Marquette, but they can track some urinary hormones. So I know you guys have done like a cycle overview in the past, but without getting into all the pituitary hormones like FSH and stuff, we have estrogen that rises first in our cycle after a period, and then the luteinizing hormone, which surges and triggers ovulation, and then progesterone takes over after that. And we have urine test strips. So literally people pee in a cup, they dip a stick, and they can test estrogen and LH. They can test LH, We're testing a monitor that can test progesterone as well. That one's not out officially yet. It's still for accuracy and efficacy being tested by the university. But so it brought in that extra piece of testing the hormones or tracking the hormones themselves with this kind of objective but third party piece, which I think postpartum is sometimes the key, because I've been the mom who's like, your baby's crying, so you're trying to like nurse while you're peeing, and then you're like, how am I going to check my mucus? So I've got like a baby, my toddler's over here like trying to throw toilet paper in, and you're just like, okay, I won't this time.
Right.
But then your spouse comes home and you're like, there were 3 times I didn't check it today. Like, I don't really know where we're at. And if that's someone's reality, they just hit a point. We can all have those days, but if that's your regular, you hit a point where you're like, I'm really frustrated right now, and I don't know how to move through this time.
Yeah, totally. Can you explain? So you did say there's like the test strips. Is it the clear blue monitor?
That is, so we do have women who use the monitor, and that is what we need for our postpartum protocol. So there's a specific protocol for postpartum women. Actually, there's a specific protocol before their period returns, before they have that first cycle. And then there's some rules for those first actually 6 cycles, because the women can be in sort of a transitional period. Sometimes we think our cycle's back, we're back to normal, but there are some hallmark signs we actually see in those first 3 to 6 cycles, if they're still breastfeeding, that are not like their pre-pregnancy cycles.
They have very into that. Let's dig into that.
Yeah.
Right now. Yeah. I want to hear that. That's cool.
Okay. Once you have your baby, so you had really high progesterone when you were pregnant because your placenta hopefully was making lots of it after the first trimester. And then you have elevated estrogen as well. You deliver the baby, the placenta delivers, and your progesterone is gone. That's why women can crash around day 4 or 5 and feel like garbage. And then your estrogen is going to excrete as well. It goes a little slower, but it's still, we get rid of that pretty fast. And we're not making any more because we're not fertile. And the reason we're not fertile is when you breastfeed, you make the hormone oxytocin, and you also make the hormone prolactin. And prolactin is what makes breast milk. And we know in those early months of breastfeeding, that's all your baby's eating. So you're making lots of it, lots of prolactin. And that suckling at the breast sends nerve impulses to our hypothalamus and our pituitary gland, and it suppresses certain hormones, FSH, the GnRH, and the LH. And because we don't have those hormones being made, the ovaries are not being told to make anything. So they're not making any estrogen or anything like that. So we're not fertile. We're not making follicles. We're not ovulating. Nothing's happening. But as the baby moves to where they're either eating, they're sleeping through the night, so they're not nursing as often. We're not making prolactin as often because the breast milk isn't having to be made every 2 hours. Then they'll hit a point, and this is where it's individual for each woman. It hits a point where, okay, there's a little gap here. Like the prolactin level dropped a little bit. Now your body can start making some estrogen again. Oh, we have mucus again. We are hitting that point where maybe we could ovulate again. But the range is so vast. I have women who nurse every 3 hours, but at 3 months, their cycle is back. And then I have women, if they nurse even once a day, they will go 3 years without ovulating. And most people are somewhere in the middle. Those are 2 extremes, but we see people, and luckily, women tend to, unless they have a major difference between how often they're nursing, like if they stayed home with one baby and they go back to work full time with another baby, if they're nursing about the same frequency, they tend to see their fertility come back close to the same time between their kids. So at an individual level, you can kind of know, okay, this is where I'm at. Like I personally, my range is like 12 to 15 months postpartum is when mine will come back. So I know I'm usually okay at 6 months. It doesn't mean I don't freak out every time I see a little bit of like spotting or something at 6 months, and I'm calling all my NFP instructor friends and I'm like, do you think this is a period? And they're like, you know better. No, it's not. But we all do that. We get there where we're like, now that it's my situation, I don't know. But women will eventually hit a point where their body gets back into that fertile state. Unfortunately, the other complicating factor is babies don't wean in a really predictable fashion. Like they don't spread out their nursing. They might sleep great one night for 8 or a couple nights. They're sleeping 8 to 10 hours. And you're like, yes, I have a 5-month-old who sleeps. And then they go through some sort of regression and they're nursing every 2 hours for the next week. And so in that case, for some of those women, that prolactin level dropped a little bit. They weren't nursing as much. So their body was able to start making estrogen again. but then the hormone or prolactin shot up when they started nursing frequently. So then the estrogen falls. They never hit a point where they were fertile again, but their body started to make fertile mucus because they had estrogen at a high enough level. And so they're like, wait, I saw it, but now I don't see it, like, or I still kind of see it. And that's just, if we can understand the physiology of why, sometimes then it even makes it easier for women to stick with whatever method they were using, so they at least understand why whatever's happening is happening. And so we go through this phase. We call it cycle 0 because it's time from birth until they haven't actually had a cycle 1 yet, where you're just navigating, okay, are we fertile again? Are you going to ovulate again? And how soon? So at some point, most women will ovulate before their first period. I think I've seen the statistics shifting around. I think now they think it's somewhere maybe between 20 and 30% of women will actually have a period start again. They'll have their cycle come back, and they really didn't seem to have a documented ovulatory event, which shouldn't really be a period, I guess. But it seems like I've had women I work with, and I'm like, nothing indicates that you had ovulation, but you are definitely having a period right now. So it seems like that does happen for some women postpartum, but a vast majority of women will have an ovulation, and then their period will come back. But this is where we first start to see the transitional piece, because I've had women who have a peak and then their period starts like 5 to 6 days later. This is normal. We see this very short luteal phase, and we see it for the first couple postpartum cycles in some women too. And then we also, once their cycle is back, we see very delayed ovulations. Women who normally might peak between days 13 and 15 may not ovulate or see peak stuff until days 29 to 32. And so that's very surprising. And if they don't know to expect it, they might think, oh, I think I saw fertile signs on like day 15 or 16. They get to day 29 and they're like, oh, my period should be here like tomorrow. I think we're good. And then they get really fertile signs on day 31, 32. And they're like, uh-oh, I've never ovulated this late. Like, what is going on? And again, it's just the education, the understanding that this is normal. We expect this in our first couple of postpartum cycles. So I've seen ovulations as early as peaks as early as day like 17, 18 in cycle 1 postpartum, but typically they're more between like days 25 and 35, if not even up to day 40, which is very surprising. And if women don't know that, sometimes they're like, my body's totally screwed up after this baby. Like, why am I suddenly having long cycles? What is going on? And that piece of just understanding, okay, this is what our bodies do sometimes postpartum, is they have these late ovulations. They can have a shorter luteal phase, but over those 6 postpartum cycles, the ovulation should move earlier and that luteal phase should lengthen out. And the other thing that's important with this to understand is if a woman, let's say she didn't get her cycle back till she was 15, baby was 15 or 18 months, and they want to conceive again quickly, they're at that point where they're ready, she should understand that it's worth a conversation with her provider that maybe her luteal phase is going to be shorter. And this would be an important time to talk about how to support her body, if that's their goal, is to conceive again soon. Because we know that in some women, in a decent number of women, that can be a factor. They can have low progesterone that will self-correct eventually, but if you're trying to conceive, you want to deal with it now.
Right. It's such a good point to bring up. And especially for women who have had previous miscarriages or maybe been told they have, some issues with the luteal phase. But for every woman, I think in some ways it makes sense to, see the normalcy of the cycle come back. I mean, that's the most proactive you can be in pro-conception, is to know that the health of the cycle is normal, not try to fix it once you're pregnant,
Right.
So that's really important. I want to bring up, Bekah, a couple of things that you were, talked about, because I see this in my practice a lot, and I just think it's important to bring up. I think many women will have a bleeding episode right around 6 to 8 weeks. It's not a period. So I'm glad that you're already nodding, because it's, women will freak out and be like, I think I'm having my period. And I'm like, well, what did it act like? And how far along are you? And classically, they'll always say, well, it was a few days, and maybe it was like kind of light, barely medium, and it went away. That seems to be a pattern that occurs for
Absolutely.
postpartum women. Yep. And then I also want to bring up that you talked about just how the hormones kind of start to resurge as we space out breastfeeding, because it allows for our endocrine system to kind of fire back a little bit. But women need to understand that your hormones are like in menopause when you're postpartum for the most part. This is why you feel differently. You know, and so I'll have women ask me, can you test my hormones? You know, because I don't feel right. You know, maybe they're having postpartum mental health changes. Guys, nobody makes progesterone when they're postpartum and they're not back in cycles. So I could test it 1,000 times in 1,000 women. It's always going to be 0. So, you know, it doesn't help to test that. And estrogen levels also remain really low, which is why postpartum vaginal dryness is a common concern. And getting back into intercourse cannot be fun for a variety of reasons, but that being one of them, you know, and just the body, of course, went through labor and delivery. So those are just things that I was thinking about. And I had no idea that they called this, you know, period of time cycle day 0, you know, and I learned that in that postpartum social media group. I'm like, wow, that totally makes sense.
Kind of catchy even.
Yeah.
Cycle 0.
Well, and it's interesting. I was listening recently to your episode on when a young girl's first periods are starting and just the whole process. And I was thinking, I was like, yeah, it's almost like because you're pregnant and you're not in cycles and then you're postpartum and it's like your body has to do it all again and get itself back, which makes some sense why we'd have this transitional few cycles where it's just not quite in sync yet. You know, the hormones are not as balanced as they should be. And just understanding that it's okay. If you are desiring conception, there may need to be extra steps, but this is a natural part of the process as well.
And one more point, I have to bring this up because this is often women, they tend to like, you know how you mentioned, oh, I thought I peaked. And then like later on you see mucus and we'll be like, oh, that can't possibly be fertile because I just peaked day 15 a week ago or so. Ladies, if it's there, it's fertile. You know what I mean? Like, do not ever just ignore signs of your body just because you're like, oh, well, that can't be possible. I assure you that many babies have told us it is possible.
Yep. And that's the thing too, is as NFP instructors, fertility awareness instructors, like we're gonna say it is very possible to get pregnant when you're breastfeeding and you haven't had your cycles back, because again, there is a certain percentage of women who will ovulate before that first bleed. That's how these women are getting pregnant, because the sign of fertility is there, the mucus. But like Bekah, you said that there may be a percentage of women who don't have those signs, or maybe life is so chaotic that cervical mucus is just really hard to use as a sign of fertility. So let's talk about, because I'm still kind of wondering, because we don't necessarily know when our cycle comes back postpartum, although based on each woman, it might be the same if you've had more than one child. But if we're using those clear blue strips, and you like you said, you're using the mucus and some use temperature, and there may be like hundreds of days even where they don't know. How do you use the clear blue strip? How do you do that? Do you just pee on the stick every day waiting for it? Do you wait for a cue from your body? How does that work? So
initially we do teach our women, if they want to use it, the lactation amenorrhea method, which if they meet the very specific criteria, it's 98% effective for the first 6 months. So we start with that for those who want to, partially because then once they do start testing with the monitor, either because they don't meet the criteria anymore or they just want to for their own peace of mind, because the monitor can detect estrogen and luteinizing hormone. So it can cue a woman that estrogen is rising, which is what needs to happen before ovulation. They will test every day. The way that the monitor works, which we get into in our intercessions, but there is like a day off between the cycles or between the testing. We call them cycles, but like the testing times, because the monitor, it's an electronic that was not designed for this. So it has a lag by 1 day with one of the versions of the monitor. But for the most part, we tell women plan, like, yeah, you're going to test every day. And the way it detects the estrogen is it sets a baseline and it looks for a rise from that baseline. So they need to test every day so that it is able to detect that if there's a shift in their hormone profile. It'll be interesting over the next few years, because like the Mira monitor is a quantitative monitor. So the Clear Blue is qualitative. It only gives us low, high, peak. Mira gives a level, like a number. And so if Mira pans out and it works well and it's effective, that may end up being an option, and women may actually end up with like a number threshold that they can go based off of. Or we can see, like, we might be able to actually see those times when, they could say, hey, yeah, my baby slept 10 hours and my estrogen rose to 150 these 2 days. And then they're like, oh, and then my baby started nursing and it dropped to 32. Like we might actually be able to see the patterns, which will be really neat to just see how this technology gives us that information even at home. And we're able to really track it and help women identify exactly what's not exactly, but a better idea of what's going on in this process. So yes, that is one of the biggest downsides with Marquette Postpartum is the cost, because you have to do those tests every day through that postpartum time.
Sure.
And do they call this whole area, is it Femtech, Bekah, isn't it? Like
Yes.
all of this technology around,
Yes.
Strips and new data points that we're using. This is the Femtech world, and it's exploding, right? I mean, That would be the thought, is that all of this is where we're headed towards, because people, they want science. I mean, and what's so amazing is how far we've come in the world of natural methods of fertility,
Right.
to be able to assure people that these are backed by science and research. And that's why Marquette is amazing, because they have done years of research. This isn't just, we took some women, we had them pee in sticks, and then we figured it out on our own. No, it was based on clinical research, and not only Marquette, and we have other methods too, but Femtech is kind of the direction it's going. I certainly hope that more research is done in this area, and I'm sure you do too.
Especially,
go ahead, Jamie.
Oh, I was going to say, especially in regards to using our cycles as vital signs of health, not just in avoiding or achieving, but like if there's these quantitative values that can indicate PCOS, or endometriosis, I don't know. There are likely patterns that we'll start noticing. Wouldn't that be an awesome tool?
Oh, to be able to say, like, because they just released the progesterone tests for the Mira. I've been just trying them on my own just to see.
Yeah.
And I was like, how fascinating will this be if a woman doesn't just have to say to her doctor, like, well, I have a lot of like spotting and brown bleeding at the end of my cycle, and I think this isn't long enough, especially if it's a doctor who doesn't really understand all of that as much. If they're able to say a normal progesterone level based on medical evidence is this, mine is reading this, so I'm low. It just might facilitate those conversations a little better. And I think you guys have had conversations in the past, just like what people feel like the state of women's healthcare is. Mm-hmm. And I'm cautiously optimistic because of this. Like, I can see where we still have a lot of room where we need to make progress, but I think this is going to help. I think Apple said that in one of the next versions of their Apple Watch, it's going to be able to like track women's temperatures to do fertility stuff, which if people could just wear their smartwatch that they're already wearing, and then it creates essentially their temperature chart, and they can kind of identify those spikes, like, cool, like make it easier for people. I'm all for that. Like I'll take the data that we can, and we can make it more normal and more mainstream and more accepted that this is how women's bodies work, and we're going to go with it and make them as healthy as possible.
And we need to normalize it. Like, this makes it so that women know that their body is normal and that we can accept the normal function of our fluctuating hormones. We don't need to cover that up. So yay, Apple, for even thinking of doing that. We don't need to cover up our fertility with a pill. I mean, so praise the Lord for that.
And women will know, when they're on the pill, again, it'll be eye-opening to people to realize on the pill, your temperature is not going to do what a natural fertile woman, does. And I think women are going to be jealous of that, and they're going to be like, wait a second, I want my smartwatch to do all those cool things with the temperature change with fertility. So just another way to say women's bodies were made good. And why are we giving them all of these hormones to suppress their body? So
this is a perfect transition. Teresa, we're going to ask a question.
There's one question I got to ask, because I feel like this is the one thing too that some people will talk about with Marquette, and I think, Bekah, I would love for you to just address it. So PCOS, obviously you were diagnosed with it. There is this little bit of issue with the monitor and PCOS and LH. So can you give us a little kind of summary of that and just what your kind of thoughts are about it?
So the concern that's valid is that in some women with PCOS, their LH is always just kind of high. And so they can either have false peaks, or they won't peak, or they're just always reading positive on LH tests. It's a bigger deal. The women who struggle with it, it's a bigger deal with the just, I call them the cheap strips, but like the ones you can just pick up at the drugstore that you just dip. versus the monitor. The reason is the monitor does look for shifts, and it can actually pick up on, it's pretty good at picking up on those shifts accurately. But when people are just dipping a stick and looking at it, it can appear positive to them regularly. My experience has been, and I've personally taught about 500 couples. And because PCOS is so prevalent, I've definitely had my fair share of women who have it. I would say that the LH issue is probably as unique as PCOS is in general for women. You know, we have women who are heavy with PCOS, who are not heavy with PCOS, who have insulin resistance, who don't, who actually have cysts on their ovaries, who don't. PCOS presents in so many unique ways for different women. The LH test issue falls right in there with it. I have women who they have no problems at all. They can absolutely use LH tests or the monitor, and it's accurate, and they're totally fine. I've had a couple who I can tell the difference. Like, I look at LH tests so frequently, people send me pictures of them, that I can spot the difference. And I'm like, that one's actually not positive yet. It's close and it's confusing, but it's not positive yet. But this one is. So I've been able to, and then I've had a couple that, no, it's not a good fit for them, and we've had to find something else. So it doesn't rule someone out from being able to use Marquette. It just, we have to kind of navigate it. They definitely need to work with an instructor who can help them find the right fit and not try to just DIY, because although if you're PCOS, you don't want to DIY anything. You don't want to be DIYing Creighton or anything else, because things are just too complicated and confusing.
Perfect. Yes. And that is the last point that I wanted to make, is this, all of this needs an instructor, a great instructor like Bekah is. Do not try to wing it. Winging it is not what actually is good natural family planning or fertility awareness-based method. So, all right, Jamie, I know you've got the last question. Tee it up.
All right. Okay, Bekah, what do you wish every young woman knew about her hormone genius?
I just want every young woman to know that we need you. The world needs you authentically living your feminine genius and doing what God has asked you to do. And to know that you have to know yourself and to be a healthy version of yourself. And the way you start that is to know how your body works. And if there's anything that's not going well, then you advocate for yourself and you find the people who can help you with that, because we need you, the world needs you, and we need you at your healthiest, best self.
Oh, I love that, Bekah. The world needs the women who are listening and the men to support the women and all of it. But 100%, I love that, Bekah. I love that so much. Okay, so how can our listeners follow you and find out more about what you do?
We have, our website is femininegeniusministries.com, and we've got a lot of information on there. And then we are also on Facebook and Instagram under the same name, Feminine Genius Ministries.
Awesome. Very good. Okay. Well, Bekah, thank you so much. It was nice to meet you. And again, we're honored to bring you in and talk more about Marquette, because I know that has been a question that we've been asked, you know, like, how does this Marquette method work? So we're thankful that you could come in and share a little bit about that. All right, Bekah. Well, thanks, Teresa. Good to see you. And I will just say to our listeners, actually, before I sign off, if you're interested in sponsoring an episode, know that you can find out more about that at our website, hormonegenius.com. If you're a business or if you're an individual and you want to gift an episode to a loved one, please reach out at our website, and also be looking for more information about the courses that we will be offering soon. All right. Thanks for listening, everyone.